Welcome to Community Forum, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernández. The A. Phillip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum has existed since 1995, and this year it will be hosting a triple celebration on August 24th and 25th. Here to talk about the events and festivities, we have David A. Peterson, Jr., the museum's president. Welcome.
How you doing? Thanks for having me. How you
Oh,
doing
thank you
today?
for coming out. Good. How are you?
Good. I'm great.
That's great. Let's start off by talking about the founder of the museum and what inspired the idea.
Definitely. The founder is Dr. Lin Hughes. She founded the museum in 1995 after coming to Pullman for real estate speculation, and after taking a trip given by the Pullman tourist community, she actually asked a question about, what were the contributions made by African Americans in the community, and when they didn't answer in depth as she wanted to, she then took it upon herself to do research. As she did that research, she stumbled upon, this lost jewel, this lost history, and, as they say, the rest is history.
What was this lost jewel, this lost history?
She always talks about a book that she picked up in Wendell Smith Library called A Long Hard Journey, and it kind of just told her, a story about the history of the Porters, the history of Pullman, etc. And, she was just perplexed that she had never heard about that before. And that's kind of what started her research.
Wow. So it was a realization through this reading. And during this reading, she learned about A. Phillip Randolph, correct?
A. Phillip Randolph, yep.
Yeah. Now, tell us about him.
A. Phillip Randolph was actually the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. They founded it, they actually established it completely in 1925. A. Phillip Randolph, he was originally from New York, from Florida, then moved to New York. And he himself was never a porter. He actually was an editor-in-chief of a paper called The Messenger. And, as a result of him having such a voice, being such an articulate man, that porters actually came to him and drafted him and said, we want you to lead us in this noble fight to, organize the first black labor union.
Wow. So he was never a porter himself. That's interesting.
Yeah, he wasn't.
And how did that drafting take place? Did they just met him, got to know him?
Well, at that time, they needed someone who couldn't be intimidated because they were afraid of losing their job. It wasn't legal for them to be organizing to start their own union at that time. And, a lot of them were family men. The porters, they pretty much started the middle class, if you will. So a lot of them were working men, family men, and, they couldn't afford to lose their jobs. So they needed someone who necessarily couldn't be bullied into silence. That's how they wound up getting him, in addition to the fact that he already had a national voice through the publication The Messenger.
The Messenger. Tell us about The Messenger and what that did.
The Messenger was similar to your nowadays Defender, and it was basically just a publication that, kind of chronologized things going on in the African American community.
Okay, so you mentioned the Defender and The Messenger. These sleeping car porters help spread news about the African American community throughout the country, correct?
Definitely.
How so, and why did they become messengers in a sense themselves?
Because they were traveling from state to state. That was the telegram, that was the internet, that was their telephone at that time. So they were able to spread these messages through conversations and actually distribution of the Messenger.
So they would pick up the Messenger. Where was it located, in New York?
Yeah, that's where he originally located.
Okay, they pick up the Messenger like stacks of newspapers, put them in the trains, and just spread them out throughout the country.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Wow. And in their conversation, in their meeting of A. Phillip Randolph, they recruited him, and where was the first meeting of these sleeping car porters?
The first meeting, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Harlem.
In Harlem.
That's where they actually began the core work of what was going on. So porters from all around the country kind of all came there.
They all congregated there. And what decisions were made there that led to this organization?
Once again, in Harlem, if I'm not mistaken, 25. That's the actual establishment. Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And I'm not positive if that was the actual first meeting,
Okay.
so don't quote me on that. But I do know Harlem is where the most significant meeting took place.
And then that led to other movements, right? Or that to the establishment of this first black labor union, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the first one to be connected with the American Federation of Labor.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually what we'll be celebrating on the 24th and the 25th.
On the 24th and 25th.
You know, the actual honoring of them formulating the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters.
Okay.
And ironically, we'll also be honoring, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And that's one of the movements that was sparked through the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, because in 1941 he originally established the March on Washington. However, you know, at that time it was for a different reason. It was for segregation in the armed forces.
Right. Okay. That's a very small, or actually a bit of history that we really don't know about or think about. That in 1941 there was going to be a March on Washington.
Definitely.
But it didn't happen.
It didn't happen because President Roosevelt actually signed Executive Order 8802. And this was the order that said, okay, we will integrate our armed forces, allow, you know, African Americans to have labor contracts and things of that nature overseas. So once that passed, they did what we like to call is shelved the movement. And they kind of just put it to the side because they didn't necessarily need it at that time. So in 1963, you know, when the Civil Rights Act was coming up a little more, they were able to just kind of pull it back out. And then that's how it actually came to pass.
That network of organization that existed was what helped make the March on Washington in the 60s something possible.
Definitely. They also, they actually are at the forefront of the Montgomery bus boycott as well.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people don't know that Rosa Parks was actually the secretary of the local NAACP chapter at that time, of which actually a former porter was actually head of that chapter. E.D. Nixon was his name. So, you know, when she actually got arrested, they had already had different businesses in the local community ready to sponsor the boycott. So they were able to pay her bail and then put the boycott into motion.
Wow. So all of this history that you mentioned that the founder was learning about, this revelation she was having through her reading, inspired her to create this museum. How did that happen? Was this museum born? Who were the supporters? Who contributed? Who came on board to help those efforts?
Well, once again, we just in February just celebrated our 18th year of existence.
That's a long time, actually. It might seem short,
Yeah.
but a lot of institutions don't last that long.
Definitely, especially being independently funded and operated.
Right.
You know, we're not funded by any city, state, local, federal funds.
Wow.
And we pride on that. And, you know, similar to the fundraiser that we're having on the 24th and the 25th, you know, these are things that help us sustain ourselves, having these fundraisers and having, you know, private donations and fundraisers and things of that. That's how we keep the doors open.
Okay. So tell me about are the founders sitting down, and who did she sit down with? You were obviously not at that first meeting. You're pretty young. Who did she seek support from? You said private funders, people from the community. Who came out to actually support this effort?
Well, actually, Dr. Hughes bought the building herself, where it was, because she came to Pullman doing real estate speculation. So
she thought it was going to be an up-and-coming area or something where she should be investing?
Yeah, exactly. So she actually purchased the building. She purchased 3 buildings, and the last one was the one that is now the museum. So she had already owned the property. And she seeked out, you know, support from a lot of people, and a lot of people kind of shunned her and said, well, you don't have any experience in museums, so, you know, I mean, are you sure you want to do this? You're not going to be able to do this. So that itself kind of ticked her off, you know, and it made her fight a little harder.
Right. She was by herself then?
Yeah, she was by herself then. So she did, we did get one initial grant to help with, you know, restoration of the building. Which she later found out was not enough, so she wound up having to put more personal money up. You know,
wow.
Yeah, but after that grant, you know, there's been no grants. Until recently in 2012, once I came into the picture, I decided that it would be in our best interest to further our mission for the museum to seek programmatic and, grant-specific type grants. So we actually got one small one to help us do some renovations on the building. We're very grateful for that one. And now we're looking for grants, to kind of help us sustain our program so that we can continue to tell the story. Dr. Hughes, she understands that, her time as at the forefront of the movement is kind of coming to an end, even though she's still in the picture.
Right.
And that's where I come in.
Okay, so tell us about how you came in. Why does a lot of people are moved by the history that you're talking about, but they don't necessarily commit their lives to telling these stories.
Right.
What brought you in, and what's kept you there?
I actually grew up right down the street from the museum. So, it's always been a jewel to me ever since I was young. I mean, I was there when the bricks were put into the wall. I was quite young at that time, specifically maybe 8th grade.
Wow.
So I mean,
8th grade.
I've been around, so I mean,
So you would see it as you're walking by?
I see it as I was walking by, and then I mean, like I say, I helped out since then. I mean, it started off with me just helping clean up around the neighborhood. As I got a little older, it started, it turned into me doing some summertime internships, paperwork here and there.
Right.
Just kind of learning the system. Then when I went away to college in Florida at Florida A&M University, Tallahassee, Florida, when I would come home during the summertime, I would do my internship, and I began to study the subject matter a little more as I got a little more intellectually inclined, if you will.
So when you were in college, there was still that pull. There was still that tug that was bringing you back home.
Definitely.
And specifically to the museum. And during these internships, did you think, well, I'm going to end up being the president of this place once?
I didn't think that, but it was in my mind that I would come home and have a lot to do with economic development in the community and urban planning. I mean, I majored in political science. I had a concentration in urban planning and economic development. So I knew that I would eventually come home and put my feet down firmly as far as trying to develop communities, because I mean, I went to school in Hyde Park growing up. So, that travel from day to day always made me wonder, what's the difference between this community and this community? That's why I took up planning when I went to college. So when I came back, the opportunity was there. Dr. Hughes actually had some health issues going on. So, at that point, she was very worried about what would happen to her work, all this work that she's done for such a great time. So, I told her at that point, she didn't have to worry about anything, because, I watched her struggle this long, and I would be there to fight with her.
Wow. And who else became part of this team to support her efforts?
Definitely. We have a pretty strong board,
Okay.
People that help us out, that have been there, been close friends of mine, friends of the museum, friends of the neighborhood that have helped us out tremendously.
Okay. Now, about the museum's purpose and mission, its first mission was to tell the story of these porters, right?
Definitely.
These sleeping car porters. That seems to have changed and expanded, right? You have a traveling exhibit, and you also said you want to strengthen the programmatic work that the museum does. Tell us about that traveling exhibit and what it is and where it's gone and the kind of reaction people have had to it.
Definitely. I actually have had the pleasure of going around with that traveling exhibit several times too. And we've been everywhere from Jacksonville, Florida, New Orleans, Boston, Philadelphia. And, what happens is we take, and it's hard to explain, but it's pretty much a depiction of what we have in the museum. We take that around the country, set it up in coalition with the National Train Day that Amtrak would do. We set up in the train days, and we'd honor existing porters. So, people who were once porters, descendants of porters, we honor them and let them know that their contributions are still appreciated. In addition to that, Dr. Hughes published the first registry. It's actually it's a book published called The Anthology of Respect. It's actually available on our website, aprpullmanportermuseum.org, and it's a national registry of descendants of porters. So they were able to send in pictures, information, and talk about their experience growing up in the household with the porter.
Wow.
Hmm.
What kind of reaction has that had? Did you had a huge response?
Oh yeah, we had a huge response. Initially, we had like over 7,000 entries come back.
7,000.
Wound up having to condense them because some of them were, duplicate people in a household. So you might have, a brother and a sister who both wanted to send in their story.
Right, right.
But we wound up condensing that, and we have roughly between 4,000 to 5,000 entries.
Wow.
Mhm.
And that you get more in every month, every day, a little here and there now.
Definitely. People come by the museum and say, "Oh yeah, my father was a porter, my uncle was a porter."
And what kind of stories are these folks sharing with you?
Just very very personal.
Tell us about one of them. You don't have to mention their names.
Yeah, definitely. Some people talk about what it was like to see their parents or their uncle or grandfather come home. One person said they would carry this doctor bag. It looks kind of like a bowling bag, and they would come home and they dump all the money on the table, and they would all just kind of like count it together because those were the tips that they made while they were on their run
Right.
across the country. And that that was wild to me, because I look at we call them the original duffel bag boys, if you will.
And that the Pullman porters were some of the first African Americans to earn, like you said, a middle class income, right?
Definitely.
That helped establish that middle class.
Definitely. And a lot of the things that they fought for in that time period are things that we can find relevant now. A lot of people don't know that when the strikes were happening, Pullman, the actual founder of the Pullman Company,
Yes.
who the Pullman porters worked for, he began to hire a lot of Filipino workers to come. So, a lot of people are aware of that. They're not aware that, Malcolm X and Phillip Randolph together were in New York fighting for rights of Negro and Puerto Rican rights during this time in the 60s.
Right.
And
Okay.
a lot of people don't know about that connection. So, this story, it goes far beyond the African American community. It's an American story.
Right. That's interesting, and I think like the name of the museum or of the events that are going to be happening the 24th and 25th, honoring the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood extends beyond the African American community. Definitely born there.
Mm-hmm.
That fight for struggle and that struggle for rights. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, it included Filipino workers, it included Puerto Rican workers.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually quite fascinating. Now, let's switch and let's talk about the events of the 24th and 25th. What's going to be happening? It's going to be a triple celebration, right?
Yeah. The 24th is more. It's our free event. We're going to be doing some lecturing, storytelling, things of that nature. 25th, we'll have Congresswoman Robin Kelly there. We'll also have State Rep L.G. Sims.
Okay.
They'll be in attendance. And once again, it's just a celebration honoring the formation of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Once again, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington.
Okay, and tell us about that Saturday. And well, you reminded me. You talked about the March on Washington, but tell us what lectures, what storytelling will happen on Saturday, and where can people get more information about this?
Well, you can get all the information from aprpullmanportermuseum.org. You can visit us on Facebook, A. Phillip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum. Follow us on Twitter, APRPP Museum.
Okay.
And if you go to any one of those locations, it'll go in depth about all of the information. It'll have specific information that we might have, might mention on here today.
Okay.
So once again, everyone should go to the website and you get more in-depth view about, the organization, the museum, the events, things we have coming up. We have a National Descendants retreat coming up soon. So this is something that's going to bring national attention to the museum.
Okay. So, but who are going to be? You said some Congress
Robin Kelly and State Rep L.G. Sims.
State representative and a congressperson will be there in attendance. But as far as lectures on Saturday or you said storytelling, that's what always interests me. What if somebody is curious and one of our viewers is curious, what exactly is going to be happening with storytelling?
Well, basically, just people telling their, reenactments of what I'm talking to you about.
Oh, wow, reenactments.
Yeah, well, just people talking about their experiences growing up in the house of a porter, growing up as a porter, things of that nature.
So there's going to be some theater, I guess, in some sense.
Not necessarily theater, but, more lecturing.
Lecturing.
People just kind of sharing their experiences.
Okay. That's on Saturday, and Obviously, the information's on the website. And on Sunday,
Mhm.
what's going to be happening on Sunday?
Sunday will be our sit down type of deal, more formal event. I mean, of course, we have some legislators there, so it's a different event.
Okay, and
But once again, all of the details are on the website, aprpullmanportermuseum.org.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. But you can also go into some detail here. So, what's going to be happening Sunday? It's going to be a dinner. You said it's formal. Is it going to be a series of speakers again during the dinner, or will there be a tour of the facilities? What's going to be happening?
Definitely be a tour of the facility. Definitely be some more speakers. Sit down dinner, smooth jazz. Nice event.
Nice event.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and now that, like you said, we can find that information on the website. Let's come back to other historical periods of significance with this museum. Bless you,
Sorry
Ben.
about that.
And your own involvement and your own hope for the museum going into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Like you spoke earlier about this traveling exhibition, and you also said programmatic work and change. Tell us about what your vision is for this museum going forward.
My vision is to make it more relevant to the younger generation.
How so?
Well, it's a story that a lot of adults don't know, so of course their children aren't going to know it.
Right.
So what I've done is I've established a subcomponent of the museum called Museum 44, where hip hop meets history. The 44 is in honor of the 44th president, and of course the museum is representing the museum. And it's a pilot program that basically brings all the information, all the history, and most important, the principles and the characteristics of the porters to the forefront for the youth. So we teach integrity, respect, honor, brotherhood in action, civic engagement, things of that nature, and we kind of make it cool, if you will. We allow the youth to come in and express themselves in a way that's comfortable for them in a non-judgmental environment.
What do you mean by that, non-judgmental?
Well, that's where the hip hop comes in. We allow them to express themselves, through song, through arts, through culture, and that alone gives us an insight to what they're really going through, and then at that point we can impart into them these principles that the porters stood by.
Okay, and that's when does that how do you bring in the young folks? Is there a formal program during the summer or during the entire year?
No. We're year round. We're year
Okay.
round. And actually, you can visit us on Facebook as well, Museum 44, where hip hop meets history, or on Twitter, Museum 44, Museum 44, and that's an ongoing initiative that we have. That's an upcoming initiative, really. We're doing a lot now, but it's building. It's kind of having a snowball effect now. So just on the lookout for that.
Okay.
And we'll actually be starting, well, not necessarily starting, but we're having a big event on the 28th, which is the actual, day of the March on Washington, which is more youth focused. And we're having a big event for them.
Okay. Also going. Thanks for that information. Now going back a little more to, I guess, earlier part of the conversation, something that piqued my curiosity, and you just mentioned again the March on Washington, the anniversary of the March on Washington.
Mm-hmm.
You said that the Pullman Porters, the Brotherhood of Pullman Porters, were actually the spark that led to the March on Washington. I think most Americans are familiar with when Dr. King
Mm-hmm.
gave his "I Have a Dream" speech.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that history and again, and why you think, and maybe another part of history from the Pullman Porters that's impacted you beside that.
Mm-hmm. Well, just the fact that a lot of people know who was invited to the table, but they don't necessarily know who set the table. That stands out to me.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, that stands out to me the most. Baird Rustin and Phillip Randolph were majorly instrumental in putting that thing together. And the turnout was so enormous.
This was back in 1941.
No, this was 1963.
1963.
This is the 1963 March on Washington. And, a lot of people aren't aware of how that took place. All they know is the "I Have a Dream" speech.
Okay.
And even with the "I Have a Dream" speech, there are only excerpts of it that they remember. They don't even remember the foundation of what that speech was about. It was about jobs. It was about, he started off saying, we came here to collect, collect our check. Where's our money? You know what I mean? He was
Right.
there. He was there fighting for jobs because, you know, he felt like a check that they had been given was void.
Right.
You know, so Martin Luther King was 26 at that time. So just, you know, kind of going back to the youth, a lot of people don't know a lot of the things that were going on during that time period were done by the youth, by young
Right.
adults.
He was, yeah, that is a young age.
Yeah, so, you know, they invited him, they groomed him, and they specifically chose him because he was the only one willing to take on this fight. Because everyone else, all the preachers at that time were kind of scared. You know, I mean, it was a very a heavy climate for race relations during that time period. And, you know, people were really just scared to be radical. And he was young and really didn't care.
And that all of that history has impacted you, obviously.
Definitely. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, growing up around that environment, I was groomed by revolutionaries. You know, so I mean, growing up in that environment, it made me kind of focus on things that people in my age group usually don't focus on.
Wow. Well, we're pretty much out of time.
Okay.
But thank you for sharing this great history, this history that needs to be known.
Definitely.
And we'll be sure to get the information out.
Okay, great. So, you know, just can I do a closing thoughts or something like that?
We're out of time.
Okay,
but,
cool, no problem.
But all the information in the show
Yeah,
will be
once
online.
again, just visit the website, and
Okay.
it'll give you all the information you need.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Community Forum is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to work with CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune into Community Forum for local issues and concerns every Saturday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernández. Thank you for joining us.